This is a FarmDoc Daily webinar. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. Today we'll be talking about the changing face of American agriculture with Mark Schleusener. He's the Illinois state statistician and has some insights from the 2022 USDA Census of Agriculture, particularly focusing on the Midwest. Good morning to you, Mark. Thank you for being with us today.
Good morning, Todd. It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this opportunity.
Well, let's get started. Where do we go from here?
I'm going to start with the history of the census. Census of Ag predates the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture was created during the Lincoln administration. I think it was 1863, but the Census of Ag started in 1840. More than 180 years later, NASS is doing it, and NASS took on this project in 1997. Prior to that, the Department of Commerce Census Bureau was handling the Census of Agriculture, but NASS is the group that does many surveys of farmers, so NASS took on the Census of Agriculture as well. The main thing about this data set is it's so rich. There are statistics available for national, state, and county levels, also things like congressional districts. Remember this, that all of the people in the House and the Senate are voting on agricultural legislation, including the Farm Bill, and some of them have agricultural knowledge or their staff has agricultural knowledge, some of them don't. This set of statistics will help elected representatives know what's going on in their district agriculturally. The watersheds, a lot of people in the environmental world are wanting to see what's going on in the watersheds, and about the closest, the narrowest we can cut it is down to the zip code level. And when we parse the data down that thin, we generally kind of stick to farm counts rather than things like acres and livestock inventory. Another thing we need to talk about is the definition of a farm. It's just $1,000, and that's been that way for 50 years. So a lot of places that are not a commercial farm, not enough income to raise a family, what some people might call a hobby farm or a lifestyle farm, they are counted in the Census of Agriculture, $1,000 of production. And here's our response rate. At the national level, it was 61%, which is not as good as we wanted to do. We want to do better. I think if we did have a success in the data collection, it's probably in the number of reports we got over the internet. That saves taxpayer dollars. So more than 40% of our responses came through the web, and I think everyone who responded, whether it was by paper or by a phone call or the internet or by passenger pigeon, it all worked. We're going to begin with the demographics, and I think the main thing here is that the USDA measures crop production and livestock production every year, primarily with surveys. There are estimates on a monthly basis, even a weekly basis for things like broilers. But we rarely ask questions about the people that are growing the food that we eat and the fuel that we use in our cars and the fiber that we use in our clothing. So in the Census of Agriculture, we do ask demographic questions. And here's an excerpt from the questionnaire. On the top line, we get the number of people involved in the farming operation. And 1 and 2 are the most common numbers, but sometimes there's 3, 4, 5, 6, and maybe 10 or more people. And we will get the total count of those producers or operators on the top line. And then we will get details on up to 4 of them. So the details will include age, gender, race, and things like that, but only up to 4. And those 4 are determined by the person filling out the form. When we ask the race questions, it is choose one or more. Many people are multiracial, and they check more than one box, and that's how we count it. Let's begin with the poll. So if you think about the average age of farmers and ranchers in Illinois, which of those categories do you think is the right number for Illinois?
So go ahead and take some time, take a look at that. And as you fill that out, we'll see those numbers coming in just a bit. We'll show the responses. So what do you think is the average age of farmers and ranchers in Illinois? 47 to 50, 51 to 53, 54 to 56, 57 to 60, or above 60. We have a few of you still working through the process here, and we'll get all those votes tallied in just a moment. About the time we get there, you go. There are some of the answers coming up just momentarily. And for your answers, the poll says 57 to 60. 65% of the folks are saying that's what they believe the answer should be. And the actual answer, Jim, is
We've got 58.6 for the average age of farmers and ranchers in Illinois. And that seems to be quite old. In fact, compared to just those Midwestern states, it is the highest number. But look on the left side of your page, and you can see that Hawaii actually is the state with the highest average age, and Illinois ranks just 20th within the country. So the Midwestern states kind of look old to us, and some people are really concerned about that. I understand their concern, but farming and ranching is much less about strength and stamina than it used to be. It's about making good marketing decisions and good land acquisition decisions and things like that. Mechanization has changed, so I don't think the age issue is a problem, although there are some people that do think it's a problem. And here we've got some county level shading to show you what's going on there. And I want to thank Jim Baltz for creating many of these maps. He's done an excellent job of giving me good pictures to talk about. Thank you, Jim. And I found this to be very interesting. I'm going to call your attention to two things. Look down each column. So the under 25 age, those numbers are about all the same across the Midwestern states and at the US level down at the bottom. And if you look at each of those columns, there's really very little difference in what's going on across one state to another in terms of the percentage of farmers and ranchers that are in those age groups. They're very similar. Now look horizontally. You go across Illinois, let's say at the top, there's 15% of the people that are over 75 years old. That's a big age, but there's about that many in many of the other states. In the 65 to 70, 25% of the people, so 40-ish% of the people farming and ranching in Illinois are 65 years or older, and that's fairly consistent across the states.
I have a quick question about that. So the 55 to 74, when you add those together, as you pointed out, is pushing that 49 to 50% across most of the Midwest. Older is one thing, farmers, and their ability to farm, but that population being so large, is that concerning in any way?
I do not have that concern, but I know other people do. I would hazard a guess, without having researched it, that many of these farms with the person who's up in age is a person from a younger generation also involved in that farm, some sort of a partner, a junior partner. It can be quite difficult to transfer a large farming operation from one generation down to the next. There's taxation issues, legal issues. It takes accountants and lawyers to do it right. So a lot of times what will happen is a younger person will get in. They don't have enough capital to buy the whole thing, but they'll use sweat equity and earn that over years.
I do have a follow-up, and I'll try not to, because we have a lot of data to follow. But do we know historically, so the 35 to 54-year-olds, if you take those two categories, or the ones in the yellow and the two categories in the green, if you go historically, if you go back 50 years, do they shift to the left in numbers so that people were coming in at an earlier age 40 years ago? Do we have an idea?
I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's an intriguing question. It could be just the average lifespan of people and the age they live to now is longer, so you're probably right.
If you have questions, you can put them in the question box and we'll get them answered as well.
All right, let's take a look at the percent of female producers. And I think the main thing that stands out there is there's Illinois with 28% of all the producers in the state being female. And it's the smallest percentage in the entire country. Look on the left. I have no idea why that is. The one thing I will say is in all those Midwestern states, there's 13 of them there, and we included Kentucky. Almost all of them are the lowest percentage across the entire country. Arizona and Alaska have the highest. And here we're seeing the number of female producers shaded by county. I wish I knew what was going on in northeastern Indiana. I don't know what's going on there, but it's more than 1,000. We asked questions about military status, and there are some USDA programs that are aimed at people with veteran status or currently in the military. The one thing we saw when we were looking at this on more of a national scale is on the southern states, those numbers and those percentages tend to be higher. Midwestern, maybe sort of in the middle range for percentage of producers with prior military service. Now, this is what we call new and beginning farmers. They've been on a farm for less than 11 years, 10 years or less. And that's any farm, not the one they're on now, but all of their farming together is 10 years or less. So if I started farming tomorrow, and I'm more than 60 years old, and I stayed farming until the next Census of Agriculture, I would be counted as a new and beginning farmer. It's not the age of the person, it's how long have they been involved in farming and ranching. Just another way of looking at the same data. And here we're looking at the American Indians and the Alaska Natives. And I think what's going on in South Dakota, I think those counties have Native American reservations in there. I think that's why they jump. And in the Midwest, there's just not a lot. Mostly it's in the southwestern part of the country. For Asian producers, I've got one little story here. Look down in southwest Missouri. And I believe that population is mostly what the name is Hmong. That is Hmong. They're from Southeast Asia. And many of them migrated to the United States in the past. And a lot of them are involved in farming. And we're pretty sure that's what's going on in the southwest corner of Missouri. I'm pretty sure that's also in Wisconsin. They're near the north center of Wisconsin. And there's not a lot of Black or African American producers in the Midwest. That's mostly in the South. For Hispanic, that's also kind of in the Southwest, also Florida. Not a big number of Hispanic producers or percentage of Hispanic producers in the Midwest. Multi-race. Remember, people can choose more than one box. And if their great-grandfather is full-blood Cherokee, they may be very proud of that heritage. They may check the Native American and then some other race category and be counted as a multi-race producer. For the Native Hawaiian, I'm not sure what's going on here. Just scattering. I don't know if there's, but look at the scale on the left. I mean, the max is 8. So we're not looking at a lot of them in the Midwestern states. And it's dominated by white people. That's just the way it is. And that's mostly true across the country for all types of farming and ranching. There are some areas, Arizona, New Mexico, Hawaii, would show up differently, but mostly it's white people doing the farming and ranching. All right, we're going to shift over to farms and land, and we will also have another ag trivia question, is what I'm going to call it.
Yeah, so we're going to do this poll, and we're going to answer a quick question while you're filling out the poll. The poll is pretty simple. What percentage of land in Illinois is used for agriculture? Just select one of those. You can choose your answer there. We'll get to that in just a minute. We do have a question that has come in related to what we were just discussing. Why is farming so different from other professionals or work? What other, Mark, do they ask? Work has 40% of the people working that are over 65 years of age.
No, I agree that's unusual. And I think the main thing is farming typically does not have a large margin, a large profit margin. So you need to kind of be big to make a lot of money. In order to get big, you've got to acquire land, and land is expensive, whether you buy it or rent it for cash or for shares. And it's just hard to do when you're younger and don't have a lot of capital. So as you age and you have had the number of successful years and you can acquire more land, your operation can get bigger. And then, you're at the top of your game. You've got your highest income, which you've worked hard for years to get to that point.
We'll go ahead and show you the answers to this poll. At 66 to 70%. Believe what percentage of land in Illinois is used for agriculture. They think somewhere between 60 and 70%. 34% of you say that is the question. Above 75%, only 10% are suggesting that's the case. What is the true answer to this question?
We've got 74% for Illinois, which is pretty high, but look at the other states, especially in the Midwest. Those numbers get big. There's not a lot going on in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, except for agriculture. It is the primary economic driver for many of the counties in those states, and also in Illinois. I wouldn't be surprised if there's 70 counties out of the 102 in Illinois where agriculture is the primary economic force.
It remains, for the entirety of the state, the #1 industry as well.
That is true. And Illinois ranks 8th in the country with that 74%. Then it starts dropping off pretty quickly as you go to the eastern states and things like that. And in some of the western states too, there's land out there that is essentially government land. It's national forest, national grasslands, things of that nature. All right, now we're looking at how big are these states. In Texas, up at the top left, is the 800-pound gorilla with 125 million acres of ag land. Then comes Montana. You can see that Illinois ranks 13th with 26 million acres of ag land. And as you go to the east, the states get smaller and the ag land gets smaller. Now here's the percent change. This is over 5 years, right? From 2017 to 2022. And this is continuing a pattern that's been going for decades, that slowly farmland is going away. They're not making more of it, or at least very rarely is that happening. Somehow Rhode Island and Alaska managed to find more farmland. I'm not sure what's happening there. In the larger farming states, it is a slow decline, really quite slow. We're looking at Iowa with about a 2% decline in farmland over 5 years. The number of farms, many of these counties that you're looking at, they're big time agriculture. And the farms get bigger as you're off to the west. One reason is you need more land to make more money. The land is not as productive as you go further west. It doesn't rain as much. Illinois is fortunate, has a good deal more rainfall than most of those states you're seeing on the map. As you go west, it just gets drier. And here's the number of producers. Texas, again, being the big one. Illinois, number 6. I don't know if most people would have thought of Missouri as having that many farm operators, second most in the country.
I have a secondary question about this because that's based off $1,000 worth of sales, correct? USDA segments this out into different areas. Do we know, for instance, and I don't know whether you have a segment that you decide is a commercial ag, do we do $100,000, $300,000 worth of sales, those sorts of $500,000 worth of sales?
Yes, there are what we call crosstabs. That is a breakdown for farm count by the economic size of the farm, in other words, sales. Also by the acreage of the farm, the physical size of the farm. And that can be interesting because a small farm, 5 or 10 acres, may be selling millions of dollars of something. Let's say it's a nursery greenhouse operation with a high sales per acre, or maybe it's a livestock confinement operation with, again, big sales per acre. So looking at the economic size of farm, and that is available in the Census of Ag publication. One more thing about the producers. Remember, what we're seeing here is a number of producers, frequently more than one on a farm. And some of those counties are pushing 4,000 producers. Irrigation. It's not a big deal in Illinois. There is some, I believe that is Mason and Tazewell counties. They tend to grow some specialty crops, popcorn, processing vegetables, pumpkins, green peas, sweet corn, things of that nature. That is Mason and Tazewell County. If you go a little bit north, I believe that's Lee and Whiteside counties, and there's a fair amount of seed corn grown in Whiteside County, I think Lee County as well. As you go to the west and start looking at Nebraska, that is primarily commodity production of corn and soybeans, nothing in this, not as much in the specialty crops arena. And that's number of farms, sometimes as many as 500 farms in a county irrigating. Here's the acres, and look at what's going on in Kansas and Nebraska especially. It just doesn't rain out there, and they've got an abundant source of water from the Ogallala Aquifer, and I'm going to talk about the boot heel of Missouri. There's rice production there, and that really separates Missouri from the other Midwestern states. There's cotton production there, which is generally different from the Midwestern states. And there's also irrigated corn and soybeans. And you'll see the irrigation in those specialty crop type areas of Illinois, the Mason and Tazewell, Lee and Whiteside counties. And I believe that's what's happening in the Minnesota and Wisconsin areas as well. It tends to be the processing of vegetables. A lot of the frozen sweet corn or canned green beans you buy are coming from those counties in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois. All right, here's total sales. That is crop and livestock, as well as livestock products. That includes milk, eggs, things of that nature. California is the big gun. They've got, they've got those fancy wine grapes. They've got almonds. They've got a lot of vegetables. With processing tomatoes are a big deal in California. The tomato paste you buy, the tomato sauce you buy, a lot of that's coming out of California. Iowa's number 2, then Texas, and Illinois is number 6. If you just restrict it to crops, California is still the big gun, Iowa number 2, and Illinois 3. Now let's look at the percentage. Crop sales compared to the total. New Jersey comes out on top, and Illinois is 3. North Dakota filling in number 2. I think what makes Iowa an interesting state is they're about down the middle. They're very big in pork production. Most people know that. They're huge. They're number 1 state in corn, number 2 in soybeans. I believe they are also the number 1 egg producing state in the country. And Iowa's got what I would call a diverse agriculture with crops and livestock. Illinois at 84% crops, and it's been close to that for the last 5 censuses in a row. The U.S. overall is about a 50-50 split between crops and livestock.
So that's a quarter of a century, 25 years.
Yes. Yeah. For about 25 years, Illinois agriculture has been approximately 80% or higher crop sales. And the U.S. has been about 50. We're going to go to livestock, and we'll have another ag trivia question.
Oh, this one's a fun one. How many cattle farms are not in Illinois, but in Missouri? Give us an answer to that one. We'll see how people do. I have not looked ahead on this one. I have some thoughts on
What's your number, Todd?
Well, they're still filling out the poll. So
they won't trust you. They won't be influenced by you. You're a broadcaster.
I think their number is high. I think it's really high. One of the last 2 categories is my guess. It's either 45 to 50 or above 50. I just feel like that's where Missouri is across the board. And they're all small.
Definitely correct on the all small. Not all. Many small farms in Missouri. A lot of small cow-calf operations.
So they're 30 to 35, but they're all really little. We'll see. Most people thought it was 40 to 45,000, and the actual answer is
43,000 cattle farms in Missouri makes them number 2 in the country, and a lot of them are smallish cow-calf operations. Whereas Texas, they got plenty of cow-calf farms. They also have a lot of cattle feeding operations. Same is true in Kansas and Nebraska. Big feedlots finishing out the cattle, as well as cow-calf operations. Illinois, not so big in that game, 13,000 farms, ranking 21st in the country. Now let's look at the sales from all types of livestock and the products. So Texas, number 1, Iowa, and then Kansas, Nebraska. Nebraska is pretty big in pork production. Iowa's number 1 in pork production. But mostly it's the cattle world, the beef cattle world, that's driving Texas and Kansas and Nebraska. Wisconsin, it's the dairy. It's the dairy. All right, there's the value of sales. And some of these counties are over $1 billion.
So before you get to the next one, and I had some insight on this. I know what the answer to this question is, because you're going to ask about cattle farms and the percent of change for the next one in each state. Based off what I know from University of Illinois Extension beef cattle specialist over the last 5 years, there has been an emptying out of cattle producers in the southern part of the state that concerns them dramatically, and the numbers correspond with this.
Let's take a look. Yeah, cattle farms are down across the country. And a fair amount of that is, especially as you're west of the Mississippi, it's been dry for years. And so the producers are not able to grow enough hay to feed their cattle. They don't have good pastures to put them on. So they've had to not expand their herd and contract their herd. Now, this isn't a farm count, not the cattle count, but this is a fairly consistent number across the country and also in Illinois.
I believe, and I don't know, I haven't looked ahead, but I believe that the partial reason for the drop in Illinois and maybe for the rest of the country is that the cattle producers don't have anybody that wants to follow up in the business.
I've heard that story a lot, that livestock production is a 365-day-a-year job, and it can be difficult to get someone of the younger generation to take over the farm from the person who's done it for years, because it is 365 days a year. In particular, if it's dairy, oh my goodness, they are milking those cows twice a day or more every day. So what's happening a lot is consolidation. There's the inventory, and look at Texas, essentially twice as big as number 2. All right, and there's the percent change, and this is the number of animals, not the number of farms. So generally down, the numbers are perhaps not as striking. I mean, Missouri's down about 1.4% and Kansas down 2.4%. So not great, big, huge reductions in cattle inventory, even though the number of farms was down at a much higher clip. Here's the dairy farms. Wisconsin, number 1 for dairy farms up there. And I wish I could add those together very quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if they're approximately equal to the rest of the Midwest. And here, look at the percent change in dairy farms. That has been significant, and that is across the US. A couple of exceptions we'll see in a minute, but the percent of dairy farms down significantly, almost universally across the country. And interesting, in South Dakota, actually up 48%, Iowa up 6%, Kansas up 10%, but mostly, now this is the number of cattle. So while the farm count percentages were down highly significantly, the cattle change for dairy cows is down, but smaller, much smaller. And what's really happened here is there's been a consolidation. When the one dairy farm shut down, those cows were generally sold and moved to another farm. They're still being milked. They're still in the production process. That's mostly what's happened over the last 5 years. Let's take a look at some slides here. Thank you, Jim Baltz, for creating this. So there's dairy cows and the change from 5 years ago. So South Dakota went up significantly. Wisconsin went down 16,000, but they started from a big number. Illinois is down 20,000. They only had 73,000. It's a big change. Now it's percentage difference, and there's South Dakota bucking the trend. They've done something, I imagine, to help their dairy industry get going. And look at the milk production. Wisconsin's the big one there. And look at the change. One more slide. There's that percent change. So even though the dairy farms went down big in Wisconsin and in most of those states, and the dairy cattle went down at least some in many of those states, milk production is up in Wisconsin. Cows are more productive. A big consolidation, that's the main thing. Fewer farms, but they're bigger now. All right, here's hog farms. And the Texas number is interesting. Texas is not really big in hog inventory, but they're big in the show pig world. A lot of FFA 4-H farms or people on the farm with a 4-H project. So they've got more farms with at least one hog than any state in the country. But in terms of total inventory of hogs and pigs, no, it's Iowa, and it's Iowa by a long shot. There we go. Nearly 24 million pigs in Iowa. Illinois ranks number 4. If there's something big here, Minnesota became the number 2 pork producing state not too long ago. North Carolina is number 3. They used to be number 2 for quite some time.
Do you know the total hog production nationwide number off the top of your head?
I want to say it's 63 million inventory, 65 million inventory.
And the Chinese number is about
300.
400 million.
Yeah.
More than half of all total hogs across the planet in that one nation.
Yeah, China, with the number of people and the diet that they eat, their number of pigs is monster. Here's poultry farms, and this, I believe, is poultry farms with sales. So we're trying to exclude what I would call a backyard flock. And I want to talk about contractees and contractors. Much of the poultry industry is done through a contractee-contractor situation. The contractor is essentially the headquarters, and we talk to them on a monthly basis for egg production, weekly basis for broiler production. And they may have 10, 20, 50, maybe 100 different farmers working for them as contractees. The best analogy I have is it's somewhat like McDonald's. McDonald's is a great big company and with many franchises, but the franchise owner down the street from you or in your same neighborhood, he's a working stiff like anybody else, or she's a working stiff like anybody else, but they're part of a much larger corporation. And when we do the Census of Agriculture, we contact the contractees to make sure we can get that production spread out into the various counties and how many people are actually producing them. But with our surveys, we just contact the headquarters or the contractor.
That is a very good example. So I assume that you may know who owns the local McDonald's in your area. I certainly know who owns the local McDonald's in our area, the franchisee. So just kind of, and in kind of the same way that some people will know farmers, but there aren't that many of them are really around. A lot of it is very locally driven as well.
Yes, yes. All right, there's the change in poultry farms and the growth in Illinois. It was surprising percentage-wise. It's mostly in the smaller farms, less than $2,000 in sales, I believe. So I'm not sure, or maybe it's less than 2,000 birds, excuse me. And there's the operation count. Down there in the southwest corner of Missouri, there's some interesting stuff going on there. A fair amount of, I believe, Amish producers with things like pasture-raised eggs and things of that nature. More trying for a niche market, a higher price at the grocery store.
Are those, do we know, do those go through the Walmart system?
I don't know.
In that case?
I'm not sure where they're marketed.
Okay, because if you were in Arkansas, which is across the border, Walmart headquarters, not suggesting that those two are related, but they could.
No, I think you're right. The HQ for Walmart is Northwest Arkansas, I think.
Benton, Arkansas. That's correct.
Probably is. Okay, good guess. Here's sales, and look at some of those counties. They are big. And the egg production in Iowa, #1 egg producing state, you know, there's 10, 12 counties there that are really big, pushing $100 million. Up in Minnesota, I know Minnesota, I think is #1 or 2 in turkey production, plus they've got the broilers a little bit and the eggs. Most of the birds we buy in the grocery store, the chickens we fry and bake, that's mostly coming from the southern states, but it's also through the Midwest. And their sales per operation. Some of these are really big time. They're hiring a lot of people. They're making a big economic impact in their area. All right, we'll go to crops. Another trivia question.
So here's our question. What percentage of ag land is used for corn in Iowa? So this is not for corn and soybeans, but in any given year, just for corn acres, correct? Or is it
specific to 2022? What percentage of ag land was used for corn in Iowa?
Less than 30%, 30 to 34%, 35 to 39%, 40 to 45%, or more than 45%. Oh, I think this is an easy answer. I have not looked.
What's your number?
I'm going big, more than 45%. I think they.
Todd's going big.
I think they raise a lot more double crop corn, especially in the northwestern corner of that state. And the answer to the question is, everybody else thinks so too. 54% of you say that's the case. Are we right or wrong? And here comes the answer.
42% in Iowa.
Oh, wrong.
Remember, they got soybeans too.
I know they have soybeans.
Okay, so Iowa is the #1 corn state in the country, Illinois #2. And what you're seeing there, that set of states together could easily be 80% of the U.S. corn production. And much of the land, just the ag land, is devoted to corn. Here we go at the county level. This is farm count operations.
Corn acres.
Oh, sorry, I went back. Let's go this way. There's the sales. I wanted to put this little anecdote in. I mean, $1 million is a lot. It is. Now, the farmer didn't keep the $1 million. That's gross sales. In Illinois during 2022, we were fortunate and got some really nice rains, and most of the other states did not, especially as you go west. Prices were high and production was high in Illinois during 2022. Usually they do not go together. You get one, but not the other. So it takes about 800 acres of corn in 2022 to generate $1 million gross sales. And a lot of people were higher than that. But the price was high, the yields were high. 800 acres would get you to $1 million in Illinois during 2022.
Again, gross sales, not the profit.
Not profit. No.
Just gross sales.
Another thing about 2022 and the census measures production expenses, fertilizer cost was really big, really big. All right, here's crop totals. So this is all types of crops. In Illinois and in Iowa, it's primarily the corn and soybeans, and across the Midwest, primarily the corn and soybeans, but this would include the vegetables and such. I think the main thing I see here is that there's this band of 100 or 200 counties that are just big time corn. Some of them 300,000 acres in a county. Here's soybean acres. Illinois is the #1 producing state for soybeans and has been something like 8 out of the last 10 years. Indiana has a slight bit more percentage of their land devoted to soybeans. The North Dakota soybean production is relatively new. I think if you go back 10 years or certainly 15 years ago, I don't think it was up there in North Dakota. That's relatively new.
That's true. Is it still true, and this is recent as well, that the Fargo area, I forget the name of the county now. If you go, there you go. One more up.
Okay, that's Fargo. I think this is Cass County, I believe.
Cass County it's one more up.
Okay, that's Cass.
That's Cass, largest soybean producing state in the nation.
Cass County has been the #1 soybean producing county. That has happened, but honestly, it's been, I think Illinois has grabbed that 3-4 years in a row with mostly McLean, and it might have been Livingston this past year.
Interesting.
We just published those numbers a while ago, and I'm sorry I can't remember that, but Illinois frequently gets to be, has the #1 soybean producing county. Let me show you one other thing. This is Kossuth County, Iowa, and then you notice it's rectangular. It's twice as big
as the normal
as all the other counties in Iowa, and it will also frequently get the top 5 or the top #1 spot for corn or soybean production.
Yeah, and then if you go to the west of Cass County in North Dakota, the one that is has the most acres, I guess, they're harvested. I would guess that was not the case in the last census, and it is driven by oil processing there.
Oh, very good.
The development of a couple of plants in that area.
I bet you're right. So there's soybean processing there to extract the oil and make meal. All right, here's soybean acres per operation. We'll go to wheat. And in many of the Midwestern states, wheat is not a big deal. It is as you go further west, especially North Dakota, where they're growing spring wheat and durum wheat. Mostly what's going on in those other states is winter wheat, and Kansas has been very big in winter wheat for decades. Illinois, not so much, but the southern, let's say, fourth of the state is pretty big on wheat, and they grow frequently double crop soybeans after the wheat. So in the same year, they're harvesting the wheat, planting the soybeans, and harvesting those soybeans later in the same year, and that is frequently the most profitable land for them, and it's typically the southern fourth, maybe the southern third of Illinois.
Is Illinois still the largest soft red winter wheat producer to the east of the Mississippi River?
I think that is true. I'm almost positive it was true in 2023. Illinois was the largest soft red winter wheat producer. The soft red wheat is used for things like donuts and cakes rather than bread The hard red winter wheat, I believe, is used for breads. And the durum wheat is pasta, and spring wheat, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
All right, there's the acreage, and you can see there's a little bit going on in the Illinois area, Missouri, Kentucky, but not much. It's North Dakota, that northwestern Minnesota area, and it's Kansas. Kansas is big time wheat. All right, vegetables, not a big thing overall in the Midwest. They do tend to be very high dollars per acre. The processing vegetables are pretty big in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, other places. The fresh market vegetables are even a higher amount of sales per acre, but then you a lot of hand work, a lot of manual harvesting. Got to get a harvesting crew, and that can be very difficult. I think what's interesting here, up in the northwest of Minnesota, the northeast of North Dakota, that's potatoes, I think, for the most part. That's the Red River Valley. And those potatoes can be used for fresh market or processing. If they're processed, the frozen French fries we buy, and the potato chips, tater tots, things of that nature. There's other vegetables going on, I think maybe more so in Wisconsin there. I think that's going to be sweet corn and snap beans and green peas, things like that. All right, and there's operations. This is processing vegetables. So that's the frozen foods we buy, the canned foods we buy. And Illinois is big in a couple of counties there. And a lot of that's pumpkins. Illinois is #1 pumpkin producing state in the country. And the pumpkin pie filling that you buy in a can, almost all that's coming out of Morton, Illinois. All right, a couple things I'd like to say about NASS. We are conducting our March quarterly ag survey where we ask farmers what they intend to plant. And we ask them about the grains and stores they have on their farms. We're also asking the grain elevators, the commercial places, what have they got in storage? And we will publish those results on March 28. You can talk to Lance Honig about it on Twitter. March 28 is a big day in NASS because there's a quarterly hog report. There is a monthly prices report. It's a big day in NASS. And the last thing I want to say is thank you so much to all the farmers and ranchers that responded to the Census of Ag. Those reports are confidential by law, exempt from legal process, including the Freedom of Information Act.
So we'll get to a couple of questions pretty shortly. We will take just a moment to thank a few folks, especially those who have filled out those Census of Agriculture functions. We have some upcoming webinars. There's a monthly series called Cultivating Caution. You can check that out. The next one is on March the 19th, Saving Lives in Grain. This is an important one as it's related to grain entrapment and prevention and response. A lot of work has happened here on campus at the University of Illinois. For those who are cleaning out grain bins where things have been stored for 6, 7, 8, 10 months, this is really important, and all across the board. So you'll want to get yourself registered for that one. That's easy enough to do. Again, that's a monthly called Cultivating Caution. The next slide will be our sponsors. They include the TIA Center for Farmland Research, CoBank, Compeer Financial, Corteva AgriScience, the Illinois Corn Growers Association, Growmark, Farm Credit Illinois, and the Illinois Soybean Association. Their sponsorships make sure that what we're doing here, the webinars, and on the website, FarmDoc and FarmDoc Daily, both continue to be used by the Ag Economist. And in the next slide, we thank our educational partners. They include the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences, or the College of ACES, who Jim Baltz was behind the scene, and myself belong to, and of course the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics. That's the FarmDoc team, the Ag Economist from the University of Illinois, and my home here at the University of Illinois Extension, and of course FBFM and the Gardner Agricultural Policy. We do remind you that after the fact, if you want to see this again, you can. It's easy enough to do. You can go visit the farmdocdaily.illinois.edu website. look in the archive section under webinars. It should be up later this afternoon. Again, Jim Baltz behind the scenes will take care of that very quickly. And you can also check out the YouTube site. This is super simple to do. You'll find all kinds of things from the FarmDoc team there at youtube.com/@FarmDoc. That's youtube.com/@FarmDoc, including the 5-minute FarmDoc videos. Those are really good little venues from the Ag Economist. You want to check those out, and they come out regularly. So you might want to subscribe, in fact, to that channel, youtube.com/@FarmDoc. We do have some questions, at least one that we would like to answer. This person asked, we know from the census that between 70 and 75% of producers nationwide gross less than $50,000 a year. Do we know that number for the state of Illinois? So
I don't have that number at my fingertips. It's definitely in the publication. I will attempt to find it, but it's going to be similar, that agriculture has a small number of farms with very large production and a large number of farms with small production. In general, that's true for, let's say, grocery stores. There are grocery store chains we're all familiar with. They tend to be big. And the mom and pop grocery store, kind of gone. Try to find a mom and pop shoe store, kind of gone. It's been a consolidation in many types of things, including agriculture.
Is there anything else we should add for the day? Well, people maybe take some time to write out another question if they happen to have one. For instance, and I just don't recall the answer to this question. Of course, I looked forward into the farm, what was coming up with our webinars. Do we have a third in this series, or is it just 2 in total? So there's already been a webinar that took place that people can go back and check out. I was traveling at that time. What did you cover during that first webinar?
Todd, we missed you greatly. That one was focusing on the entire U.S. So the same type of maps you saw, we were doing that for all 50 states. We did not go down to the county level, but much of the content was similar. How many cattle farms? How many farms with Native American operators, questions like that. And it showed, I think, some national trends or geographic trends for a number of different things.
We do have another question that's just coming in, and I get this one. So the question is, should we raise the level of income to qualify as a farm, that $1,000 level, and how would you do that? And I think, does that require congressional action to do it?
I'm pretty sure it is legislated rather than a USDA definition. And NASS does not do policy. We count and measure things, so someone else will decide that, and then we'll count them the way they want us to count them.
And nobody's asked? It seems surprising that there hasn't been a policy push, or maybe it is simply that the organizations would like to continue to count as many farms as possible. That's a policy or political issue that you should not address, probably.
Yeah, it can be a hot button issue. Some people think the farm count should be big, and some people, if you raise the $10,000, there was talk about doing that some 20-ish years ago, and it did not go through. So $1,000 is the definition. It's been there since 1974.
We have another question. Ask, as a result of the consolidation, and I think you've answered partially already, does NASS track the size of operations to see how dramatic the trend is in consolidation?
I'm going to say in general, yes, but we don't publish statistics of this nature very often. The Census of Agriculture gets us a much richer, denser data set, so we can do this type of work. With what we're measuring on our annual survey program, we frequently don't have that information. There is an annual publication for farm count and land and farms, and there are some breakdowns by size, so I think there are some information on that, but not nearly as much as we have every 5 years.
Mark, we thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate that. As you exit today, there will be a survey that pops up. We want to make sure you fill that out. Jim Baltz, who's behind the scene, will make sure that Mark and myself and the whole of the FarmDoc team will see your answers to all of those questions. We'll see them this afternoon, so do take some time to fill that out. On behalf of Jim Baltz, who is behind the scene, and for Mark Schleusener, the State of Illinois statistician with USDA NASS, the National Agricultural Statistics Service. We do appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. You have a nice afternoon.